says the issue isn't wages, but benefits like sick leave, medical coverage, and prescription drugs. CNS wants to eliminate defined benefit pensions for new hires and shift more health costs onto workers. AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka says Republican presidential candidates are spewing racism and hatred on the immigration issue.
These are hateful and racist viewpoints. They're not accidents. They're intended to demean and divide. There are no codes or hidden messages here. These candidates are telling us they believe that some people are superior and others are inferior, and they intend to govern our country on that basis.
Now here's Mitch Lawrence with Wynn's Sports Minute.
Sad to report, but Planet Lovetron has lost its most famous resident. Darryl Dawkins might have been the only resident of the planet. Dawkins, you see, made it all up. For those who don't remember, Darryl Dawkins was a pro basketball center back in the 1970s and 80s with the Philadelphia 76ers, New Jersey Nets, and a few other teams. This gentle giant of a man was always the life of the party and is best remembered for a few things. First, he was the very first high school player to be drafted by an NBA career and bypassed a college career. Later on, Kobe Bryant, Kevin Garnett, and LeBron James all took the same path to the NBA as Dawkins. Now, lots of today's players consider themselves entertainers, but Darryl was probably one of the first. He gave his thunderous dunks nicknames, especially the ones that shattered glass backboards. He also gave himself nicknames. Chocolate Thunder was his best known. And as he often boasted, he came from Planet Lovetron. Actually, he hailed from Orlando, Florida, where the Sixers discovered him before he started his senior season at Maynard Evans High School. They were unimpressed with college players and heard through the grapevine about this kid in Orlando who was bigger, stronger, and better than anyone else. So they drafted him. Although he never made an all-star team, he was all-world when it came to his flamboyant personality. So rest in peace, Chocolate Thunder, and all hail Planet Lovetron. The Sports Minute for Workers Independent News, this is Mitch Lawrence.
Brought to you by the IBEW, 750,000 men and women powering the way for an American comeback. Information on how to become an International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Power Professional is online at ibew.org. Workers Independent News is heard daily on The Rick Smith Show, live 3 to 6 p.m. coast to coast at thericksmithshow.com. The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
You've been listening to Wynn, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
It's time for the Rick Smith Show.
I want you to get up now. I want all of you to get up out of your chairs. I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore!"
I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I could drag it into the bathroom and drown in the bathtub.
You bet I cut the taxes at the top.
How dare you? How dare you? Go ahead, make my day.
The Rick Smith Show starts now.
This town gonna be here long after I'm gone. East side, west side, people don't surrender. They've been down, but they still rock on. Oh, and this town is my town. Alright, love or hate, it don't matter. I'm gonna stand and fight. This time is my time. She got her ups and downs, but love or hate, it don't matter. 'Cause this is my town.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks for being here today on the big program. Lots of things to get to, lots to talk about. The aftermath of the big NLRB decision, that high on everyone's mind. And today, being the first day of the week, the first kind of the beginning of the new school year, we're going to kick off today with a couple of interviews from our badass teachers who have begun an amazing organizing journey. These are some really fantastic people who have said, you know what, public education, extremely important. In fact, one of the most important things that we can fight for in this country. And I've said before a million times, education is the hill that the working class of this country has to die on. Because if they take that from us, if they're able to wrestle that from our hands and then just give us basic job training so we can do all their work, but not really ask why or be able to maybe do it ourselves, they win. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And every week for the rest of the school year, we've partnered with the Badass Teachers to do a weekly topic, a weekly couple of interviews, a weekly couple of segments to talk about what's important in education. And I think it's a great thing, and I'm really looking forward to the coming year. Also going to talk a little bit more about education today, kind of a whole education theme. I got an author who's written a great children's book on the 1910 Teamsters strike and why that is so important, why education, especially labor education, is so very important. And of course, our good friend Kevin Mahoney, editor zero at the Raging Chicken Press, going to be here to talk a little bit about the higher education world. Hope everyone had a great weekend. I did. Lots of things accomplished at the home front, but I got to be honest, could not get away from the email conversations and my business friends telling me it's the end of the world. The world is coming to an end. It's all over. It's all over, man. It's over. Now that this tyrannical NLRB has come forth and harmed these poor franchise owners, it's going to kill the franchise model. And I said, you know what? Part of me says good. I hope that is the outcome. It's not going to be. Understand, that's not going to be the end of it. It's going to mean that the big company, the overlord, the overparent is going to have to get involved and say, and set some minimum standards for their franchise holders. That's all this really says, is that you as the behemoth, you have some responsibilities to make sure that competition is on a level of, are the people providing good service? Are the people providing good products? Are the people providing your name? I mean, it's amazing to me that in this day and age that the corporate overlords would be going, oh, we don't care what you do. It's not our problem, but our name's all over it. That's one of those things just kind of really very shocking to me. And something that I hope this changes. The decision, if you didn't know, the National Labor Relations Board ruled last week that there's some responsibility when you're talking about a joint employer situation where, let's say, McDonald's, they're the big boy, the fast food industry, pick any of them who franchise out to me, say I want to start my own fast food restaurant. And I go and I contract with them, and they set me up with everything I need, all the machinery, all of the plans, all of the food, everything's done for me. I'm really just a manager. I'm the manager who's taken on all of the financial responsibility. And I say I can do this, as well or better than anyone. And I've got location, because we know that's the most important thing. And then I'm going to set out by, engaging in cutthroat competition on wages. And the corporate overlord says, well, we have no responsibility. It's them. It's their fault. Leave us out of it. And the conversations that I've had this weekend with people have been, wow, that's a pretty dumb model. When you break it down and you start talking about what's been allowed to happen, I think most people go, wow, how'd that happen again? Can you tell me that? Well, we know how it happened. This is what business friendly gets us. This is what the destruction of labor unions gets us. This is what a business friendly NLRB of all of the Bush years and the Reagan years, this is what it gets us. And this is why it's important that the labor board and the Department of Labor really has a worker-centric mentality, because business controls all of everything. They control all of the inputs. They control all of the conditions. They control everything. And if you go back to the original National Labor Relations Act, there isn't a word in there that gives anything to the employer, because they knew, the employer has all the rights. The employer has all the power. All the National Labor Relations Act did was give some power and some rights to workers. The right to strike, the right to organize, the right to collective bargaining, the right to concerted action. All of those things, those are the rights that, and they're not much, trust me. But they gave those rights to the workers, and that was too much. And from the passage of the Wagner Act until now, it's been Let's see how we can limit. Let's see how we can destroy. Let's see how we can go after those minimal laws. Now think about this for a second. Remember when Hurricane Katrina came through? There was some talk about this over the weekend because it's the 10th anniversary of the disaster. If you remember, and I talked about this quite often when it happened, the first thing the Bush administration did, and we're hearing stories about this, but the first thing that they did is they suspended most of the Department of Labor's regulations. They immediately did away with the Fair Labor Standards Act, which meant that if you were going to work for $1 an hour, because, hey, we got a lot of desperate people here, and we were trucking in thousands of Latino workers who were of questionable documented status. In fact, I saw something the other day that said almost half of the workforce that rebuilt New Orleans was of Latino descent, and more than half of them were undocumented. So, they're saying, wow, it's an amazing comeback. They rebuilt. Yeah, they rebuilt it with labor that was paid peanuts, if at all. And if you look at some of the stories that came out this weekend, they found that, wow, how many people got ripped off? There was a 2007 Interfaith Worker Justice Report that found that they had looked at 218 workers who had done some work in the cleanup in New Orleans during that whole Reconstruction time. And what they found is almost half, about 47%, didn't get what they were entitled to, didn't get what they earned, didn't get the wages that they were paid. And more than half, 55%, didn't get overtime protection or any of that stuff. So there was a ton of cheating going on. And one of the stories that I read, this guy said, look, I work for this contractor who was out of Texas. They came in, they contracted with us to do all this work, and we did. We worked our butts off for an entire month, and then they bailed back to Texas, took the money with the account and left, and we got nothing. And they're still fighting it. But, how many years ago is that? Now you've taken these jobs to work in environments that basically New Orleans at the time was a big toxic soup bowl. When the hurricane hit and all of the chemicals and all the oil and all this stuff went, big toxic soup bowl. So people are in there cleaning this up, not to mention the mold and the asbestos and all of the other who knows what that these folks were exposed to. That set aside, they didn't even get the wages that they were guaranteed. And I blame the Bush administration for that, because their first reaction was not, hey, how do we get the most resources in there and how do we get people in there? It's not, hey, how do we make sure that workers are taken care of? No. It's how do we cheat them? And that, to me, I think speaks volumes for what we've allowed to happen. So when I look at this NLRB decision, I think it's a good thing. It's a step in the right direction. And it's going to be really interesting. To say the least. I got to be honest, really interesting to say the least, to hear the business community squeal, because their monopoly, their absolute power is now somewhat a little bit being tested. And maybe they may have to, 1, share some of their profits, 2, maybe not take so many tax dollars, and 3, maybe have to think about workers in a way that they haven't had to think of, I don't know, in at least the last 30 or 40 years. Going to be an interesting couple of months, to say the least. And out of this, I do see some very strong organizing. The fast food industry especially, but it just doesn't stop there. You think of every one of these companies, these big name companies who have third-party logistics companies. There was a Mercedes plant out in California. You may remember this story we talked about a couple of years ago. There was a Mercedes plant. They wanted to go to a third-party logistics company because they didn't want to have workers. They just wanted their work done. They didn't want to pay anybody. And I remember the union fought, and finally they won. They won the right to keep the company the way it was. But it took an awful lot of community effort, an awful lot of worker effort, and of course, international shame, since it wasn't a U.S. company. Had it been a U.S. company, there would have been no question about it. They would have done it. But that's why I think this decision, this is a good thing, and it's something worth talking about, and we're going to do that this week. But today, first hour here, we're going to talk a little bit about education. I think it's important, especially with our good friends with the Badass Teachers Association. Quick break, right back with our bat friends. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
When the Saints come marching in, when the Saints come marching in, I wanna be in that number, oh yes. Now here comes Papa Jack with his banjo.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1991. 3,500 buses rolled into Washington, D.C. They were loaded with protesters there to participate in Solidarity Day. The AFL-CIO organized the event to coincide with the Labor Day weekend. They issued a statement, "Why We March," outlining labor's demands. The purpose of the day was to bring attention to the concerns of the nation's working people, especially over health care. Other reasons for the march included a call for more public works programs. Another major demand was the end to permanent replacement of striking workers by scabs. Bernie Dinkin, Secretary-Treasurer of the Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers Union in Philadelphia, explained, "One of the main purposes for us going down is to let our friends know, our friends in the Democratic Party who are sitting on their laurels, that if they do not support anti-scab legislation, we will vote against them, no matter what they've done in the past." The most important aim of the event was to show worker strength and solidarity. A similar showing of solidarity had taken place in the nation's capital 10 years before. After President Reagan fired striking air traffic controllers, a September 1981 rally had drawn more than 250,000 people. The 1991 action brought out similar numbers. Despite the 95-degree weather, tens of thousands converged on the nation's capital. They came from across the nation and 30 countries. 100 buses and a specially chartered train made the trip from Philadelphia. Noticeable among the crowd were members of the United Steelworkers Union with their gold and blue shirts. 180 different labor, religious, and civil rights groups stood up on that day for the rights of working people. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm John Kerr. President Obama renewed calls for gun safety measures after a gunman killed 2 journalists as they delivered a live TV report in Virginia. Fox contributor Keith Abloh criticized President Obama's support for stronger gun laws.
It would be helpful if President Obama, frankly, would stop tweeting or whatever he does about gun control and get serious about attacking mental health care and stop inflaming racial discord.
Similarly, Fox News legal analyst Peter Johnson Jr. asked, how soon is too soon when it comes to using the tragedy in Virginia to push for gun control? But just the night before on the very same network, victim Allison Parker's father, Andy Parker, told host Megyn Kelly,
I'm going to do something, whatever it takes to get gun legislation to shame people, to shame legislators into doing something about closing loopholes in background checks and making sure crazy people don't get guns.
For more on this and other stories, visit MediaMatters.org.
Chances are, when you took a shower this morning, an AFSCME member made sure that water was clean. When you drove to work, an AFSCME member maintained the road. When you rode an elevator, an AFSCME member inspected it. I'm David Philman, Executive Director of AFSCME Council 13. The American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. AFSCME members enforce regulations, keep prisoners behind bars, take care of patients, protect the environment, and more. The work isn't glamorous, the salaries aren't high, but AFSCME members serve the public in every aspect of our daily lives. Chances are, you'll never see that AFSCME member working in a sewage plant, diving underwater to repair a bridge, or answering a 911 call. But aren't you glad they do? For more information, visit AFSCME13.org. We are AFSCME.
Public education is going to take a big hit.
The biggest wave in school closings ever. Dozens of public schools are shutting down.
Lots of ugly cuts going on
state order
here.
is calling for the closing of half the schools.
Fewer teachers and fewer schools.
They got these fools closing schools and it can't be ignored. As if our future is a budget line we cannot afford. They got no money for schools, but they got funding for war. They say the conversation's closed. I said we break down the door. I said we stand up for our
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So the new school year is upon us, and we here at the Rick Smith Show think it'd be a great idea. And I know this is unusual, but it'd be a great idea to talk about education and not just with politicians and pundits. But hold on. Maybe you need to sit for this. Maybe talk with actual teachers. Who knows? Maybe actual teachers who teach actual students, maybe know firsthand the day-to-day, what's going on in the classroom, what's going on in the schoolyard. Maybe just a thought. I know it's a radical idea. I know it has not really been done, but we're going to give it a try. And I also know that we may hear some things that we're not ready for. Like we need to invest in education, like fund it fairly. That's a radical idea, I know. And the corporate flowchart, not the answer. So the Rick Smith Show and the good folks at the Badass Teachers Association have partnered, and we're going to talk about education throughout this school year. Now, their mission is to give voice to every teacher who refuses to take the blame for failure of our society to erase poverty and to solve the inequality problem, and they're going to do that through education. They refuse to accept the assessments, the testing, the evaluations that are created by the corporate-driven, by the big money interests. And here for the inaugural, the kickoff, I have asked the general manager of the Badass Teachers Association, Marla Kilfoyle, to come talk with us. Marla is a nationally board-certified teacher, more than 28 years in the classroom in Maine, Florida, and New York. And she is the chief cook and bottle washer over there. Marla, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you so much, Rick. We're really, really excited to be in partnership and to get the voices of teachers on radio. That's awesome.
So we hear the Chris Christies of the world that, we love teachers, but we hate those unions. We hear the John Kasichs of the world saying that we do away with those whining lounges. I thought it'd be a good idea to start talking about what's really going on in our education system, which to me is the privatization of our commons.
Yeah. Well, as we've spoken, the quote-unquote privatization movement has an immense head start on us, and they were kind of really able to successfully build this apparatus, which, as we have seen, especially I think, you see it very prevalently right now in Chicago, where you have 12 parents who've had to go on a hunger strike to keep their school open, their community school. All they want is just to have a school in their community. So the problem is that these privatizers who are seeking to create a dual system of education in this country, one for the haves and the have-nots, who are seeking to bust labor unions in this country, they've really got a head start on us, a good 8 to 10 year head start.
Yeah.
And so right now we're really just working hard to expose the narrative, to expose the rhetoric, to, meet them face to face, really downplay a lot of what they're saying, which is not true, and really fighting to get public education back as an entity for people in their community.
Let's talk about the Badass Teachers Association. How'd this get started? How long have you guys been doing this, and what's the focus?
Well, Badass Teachers Association started on, I sometimes get the date wrong, I'm so bad, June 14th of 2013. The Facebook page, which is really our mothership, we have 55,000 members on our close Facebook page, was created and started by Priscilla Sanstead. She is a education activist in Oklahoma, and also by Dr. Mark Nason, who is a professor at Fordham University. So Priscilla created this Facebook page, which is our mothership. And from that Facebook page, we created really sort of this social media entity. We have 50 state BAT Facebook pages. We have Washington BATs. We have New York State BATs. We have Florida BATs. We also have a very active Twitter feed, a pretty popular blog, website. So we kind of really developed this digital platform that sort of grew into a boots on the ground, where we now have state groups, like, for example, the New York State Bats just protested, along with NYSUT, the state union, just protested the governor at the New York State Fair. Our Washington Bats are constantly planning boots on the ground activities. Our Nevada Bats just actually did a protest at a board meeting about the privatization there. So we've now developed into boots on the ground, activities as well as a very large social media platform.
Now, is it only for teachers, or can parents be involved in the Badass Teacher Association? And, if you want to check out the website, badassteacher.org, we'll get a link at the ricksmithshow.com. So can I, as a parent, can I join this?
Yes. We love our BAT parents. We have tons of BAT parents. We have BATs who are also in higher education. We have actually also student activists who are in college. Some of them are also in BAT. We don't let in high school students or any other kinds of students, but, because there's teachers in here that are talking about things and stuff. But we do work extensively with student groups. We've worked extensively with Newark Student Union. In fact, they're BATs. They're members of BATs. But yeah, we have lots and lots of active BAT parents. Definitely.
See, what I've been saying for years, Marla, is that, the articulate voices of teachers, during the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of attacks on union members. And a lot of those guys, they were factory workers, construction workers, truck drivers. They weren't really the educated class, so to speak. They weren't as well written or as articulate, generally speaking. And I've been saying, now that we're seeing these attacks on teachers, is it going to be a moment where we start seeing the professional union members stepping forward saying, wait a second, these attacks are unfounded, they're wrong, and we're going to be the face and the voice of defending them?
Oh yeah. I mean, definitely. One of the things I think that's important about our organization is that we are predominantly teachers. We are teachers who are in both the national unions, the NEA and AFT. We are ardent, obvious union supporters, right? As unionists, we stand up and recognize the importance of unionism in the country. Martin Luther King said that unionism built this country. Unionism addressed the inequalities that we've seen in our society and continue to see today. I mean, take the Fight Diet hunger strikers, for example. Chicago Teachers Union was there on the ground supporting them. I know Randy Weingarten from AFT went there on Wednesday. Really the essence of what unionism is about, especially I think with teachers unions, which is very, very important. Teachers unions, both on the national, state, and local levels, always weave in platforms that talk about the issues of social justice. Everybody should be treated equally. Everybody should have access to equal resources, et cetera, et cetera. And I find that specifically in my experience with teachers unions always develop strong platforms in regard to social justice issues. So I don't know if I answered your question, but the fact of the matter is that as teachers in a union, we are going to stand up and call those untruths out that cause injustice to people.
Right.
And that's what we should do.
And looking at it, but for too long, people have kind of taken the abuse and taken the assaults and the attacks and just kind of internalized them. I'm finally glad to see that there are people who are saying, enough of this nonsense. We're going to call it out, and we're going to call the Chris Christies and the John Kasichs and the now gone Tom Corbett's. We're going to call them out, and we're going to hold them accountable for their bad policies and their assaults on our children.
Yeah. And that's what BATS does. I mean, I think that's what we were really the first to do that as far as a teachers organization goes. There's other organizations that have been doing that for a long time. But as far as a teachers organization, that's why I think we really blew up, because teachers are going, oh my God, these people are actually calling out Arnie Duncan. They're calling out Chris Christie. They're calling out Cuomo. They're writing letters. They're making, social media memes. They're doing Twitter actions that are speaking the truth as to what these people are doing. And what people don't really realize that are not teachers, most of our abilities to be able to do that is having these sort of job protections, these due process protections. As a private citizen and someone who works in a state where teachers have due process, right? I'm off of school now and I can pretty much do what I want as far as my private life. And if my private life means that I want to do a letter writing campaign to Governor Cuomo because he's destroying education in New York State, I can do that. So I think the popularity of that was, first of all, the draw to the name. We got a lot of flack for the name, but I think a lot of people were drawn to us because of that. And that name defines the fact that we are not, and I'm going to repeat, we are not going to sit there and quietly raise our hand and wait for somebody to recognize us. We're not doing that anymore. We are going to call you out. We are not going to wait for you to call on us. We're going to call on you. And I think that was the draw of that.
No, and that's what I've been saying for the longest time needs to happen. And thank goodness you guys have filled that void. And are you surprised at how quickly, because I have a number of friends who are teachers or work in education, and they look at your group and they're like, thank goodness, it's about time, let's go. And because I think for too long, people thought that they were alone.
Yes. And that hits it right on the head. When we first took off, people were like, oh my God, this is great. And then our first action was really to call the White House and demand the resignation of Arne Duncan. That was our first big action. We shut the phone lines down to the White House, basically. So I agree. We get a lot of people that come on and say, oh my God, I'm so glad I found this place. I thought I was alone in feeling this way. And what drew out of that is Priscilla Sanstead, who is the co-founder of the group. She's a remarkable people connector. And she said, we need to develop these specialty groups where bats who teach elementary school can go to a Facebook page and talk. And she developed what we called our specialty groups. So we have bats in elementary ed, we have bats in special ed, where now bats can go and talk with people in their specialty areas. And that only strengthened the organization, which was great.
Again, the website, badassteacher.org. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. You can also go to their Facebook page, their Twitter, all of that. Follow along, participate, and over the next several months, as school is going on, we will have the bats back to talk about issue after issue. Last question I've got for you, as the new year is kicking off and underway, what advice do we have for parents and students going into the new year?
Become informed. You have to become informed. Parents and teachers have to read these articles. My biggest piece of advice, read Diane Ravitch, read her blog, read the Bat blog, read a lot of these great education blogs that are coming out. Peter Green, Steven Singer is excellent. Read these writers that are speaking the truth. Get informed.
Yeah, no, don't just listen to the political talking heads or the pundits on fake news. Actually do a little research and educating of yourself, right?
That's right. That's right.
Good stuff. Marla Kilfoyle, I appreciate you taking a little time for us. Thanks so much, and I look forward to talking to you again and again as the school year goes on.
Great. Thanks, Rick, and we're honored to be a part of it.
Thanks so much, Marla Kilfoyle, General Manager of the Badass Teacher Association, badassteacher.org, the website. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
It is just mind-boggling to watch this happening.
A lot of flooding all over the city.
Buildings have collapsed. There are reports from New Orleans of people trapped in buildings, but there could be far worse still to come.
The 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina.
And it's very likely to get worse in the future.
NASA warns at least 3 feet of sea level rise now locked in. Obama heads to the Arctic to highlight global warming. Plus,
it's got so many benefits and so little downside. Why would you not do that?
Switching to clean energy will cost less than fossil fuels in the long run, says Citibank.
All of those stories and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
There is no perfect source of energy. Every one of them has a downside. Solar is great, but solar takes huge amounts of water.
Oh, Carly Fiorina, you are darling. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I remember it like it was yesterday, unfortunately. the day that Hurricane Katrina came ashore 10 years ago this week.
Yes, Hurricane Katrina was the powerful hurricane that wrought devastation across much of the Gulf Coast, but drowned the city of New Orleans. Back in 2005, we were broadcasting live from the anti-war protests at the Bush Ranch in Crawford, Texas, when the frightening National Weather Service alert came across the wires.
It's actually from the National Weather Service, a most powerful hurricane with unprecedented strength, rivaling the intensity of Hurricane Camille of '69.
Oh my.
Most of the area will be uninhabitable for weeks.
Katrina's ferocity was the first that many in the public had ever heard of global warming. But the real cause of the devastation was the oil and gas industry's decades-long destruction of Louisiana's storm buffering wetlands, plus the shoddy levee system built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to hold back the ocean, created the conditions that allowed Katrina's storm surge to flood the city, killing an estimated 1,800 people. Hurricane Katrina changed the face of New Orleans forever. The costliest hurricane yet in the U.S. Its heartbreaking aftermath exposed our nation's deep vulnerability to disasters. Resilience to the accelerating impacts of global warming is also the core message of what the White House is labeling President Obama's climate change tour. After skewering the oil industry for its anti-free market efforts to kill clean energy in Nevada, and then commemorating Katrina's devastation in New Orleans, Obama goes to the Arctic Circle, the first sitting American president to do so. The goal of the trip is to help Americans and the corporate news media confront the fact that climate change is not some distant threat, but is impacting Americans right now.
You know, it'd be a hell of a lot easier for the president to do that had he just not given the final approval to Shell Oil to drill in that very same Arctic.
Obama will be visiting coastal villages in Alaska that are having to relocate away from the surging ocean, even while the permafrost melts beneath them. Now, some impacts are unavoidable. NASA confirms this week that sea level rise continues to accelerate thanks to global warming. Moreover, in this study, they say, quote, it is pretty certain we're locked into at least 3 feet of sea level rise and probably more. In other words, they say it's not a question of if, but when.
Well, when? Do they give a timeline for any of this?
They don't. They say they don't have the data yet to be able to estimate when this will all happen. They said it could be 100 years. It could be less. Meanwhile, a new economic report finds that the cost of moving to clean energy would be cheaper than our current fossil fuel-based economy. The detailed economic analysis from banking giant Citigroup finds that over the next 30 years, the cost of transitioning to clean energy is about the same as what the world would have spent on fossil fuels anyway over the same period of time.
Oh, those lefty tree huggers at Citibank.
And they say we would save billions, if not trillions of dollars, avoiding the risk of disasters from global warming impacts. On the broadcast this week, environmental journalist David Roberts of Vox.com said the Citigroup researchers were so stunned by their results, they concluded their report with a simple question.
Do you do the same thing you're doing at enormous risk, or do you take this alternative route, which costs about the same and avoids this enormous risk? They basically say, like, why would you not do this? Like, it's got so many benefits and so little downside. Why would you not do that?
Why would you not do that? Hey, Citibank, have you met what has become of the U.S. Congress? For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. You can download our reports anytime via iTunes. Find us and follow us on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Do you know what it means to miss New Orleans and miss it each night and day? I know I'm not wrong.
In the end, Wall Street, with Obama, Duncan, Bloomberg, Wolcott, and Goldstein as its agent, they want to turn public education into private, profitable businesses. They hope to impose a factory regime of managerial control over educators' working conditions and our students, our children's learning conditions.
Shut it down before the ride comes. We've got to shut it down.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com, as we continue our education discussion. New year has begun. What kind of reforms, what do we need to be doing in the classroom, and what are our teachers putting up with? What are they doing? I got to tell you, as we do this education segment throughout this year, I think a lot of eyes are going to be opened to different thoughts, to different ideas, like maybe funding education, just my thought. But anyway, the Badass Teachers Association, badassteacher.org, the website. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. We've asked Priscilla Sandstad, she is the co-founder of the BATS, to come talk to us a little bit of why, what drew her to it. Priscilla, thanks for taking time for us.
Sure. So glad to be here.
I look at this, education is a hot topic, hot issue that we see all across the country. And I think all of us who are parents want our kids to get the very best education possible. And yet the reforms that I'm seeing, not so much, which is why I'm glad to see the BATS, the teachers are actually coming forth and talking about what's going on in the classroom. So you were the co-founder of the BAT group, correct?
Correct.
What drew you to that? What made you come in and want to and start this group?
I didn't get into education activism until the Seattle MAP test revolt, which was February of 2013, and we formed in June of 2013. I had some of my previous experience. My daughter was at a charter school in 1999. It was brand new. She was in the first grade, and there was no library. And of course, we had a million books at home and loved to read. And I thought the school had to have a librarian, and there was no money for one, so I just volunteered. I was fortunate enough to have the time to do that, and then I had a little bit of money to where I could go to yard sales and thrift shops, and they would sell me books for a nickel a piece. And I built a library and had about 5 book fairs there in the year and a half that we lived in the city in Florida. And from there, I could get the science books and the newer books. And I had 10 old encyclopedias, and I would just tell the children, there's things in there that are way out of date, but at least you can research certain things in there and get used to what encyclopedias are all about. So, I learned Dewey. I had parents dumpster diving for me, getting shelves from the remodeled Kmart, and other parents got furniture from the county school warehouses, and so we were off and running. So when I saw that the Seattle kids in the high school did not have any access to the library for 3 weeks, I just was pretty ticked off about it and couldn't believe it, because so many of our children don't have computers at home, even now, and certainly back then.
Right.
They don't have access to books. It may be several miles to the public library with no bus to get there. They may have a single parent working several jobs, and they take care of their siblings. So access to a library is vitally important for the kids in public schools. And so then I started joining groups and just reading more and following people's blogs and friending people, and because I friend anybody, and I just got more involved, and I could not believe how many brilliant, experienced minds had already been working on this issue for a long time, and still nothing was really happening.
Right. And what they needed was a platform. They needed something to draw them together.
Well, there were some platforms out there. Dump Duncan had about 1,800 members, and I joined that. There were other groups that I was joining, and, there had been the big march on Washington, but I just assumed that with all these other people that were so much more experienced and knowledgeable than I was, that something would have already happened. So I was saying, when's somebody going to do something? And I was not trying to say anything about the people that were already trying. Why had their efforts been in vain? I just didn't understand why nothing was happening. So, in co-founding this group with a pretty cheeky name, which is, kind of urban street slang for awesome, like, gee, Mom made a pretty badass pizza.
Yep.
It was kind of like, I'm not a cusser, so it's like, badass, well, whatever. Vexed teachers waving their arms, that's not a name that's going to work.
No, that's not getting anyone. That's not getting any attention.
No, Dump Duncan was a fabulous group.
But you got to know who Duncan is for that to mean anything.
Right, and I thought, that's kind of mean about Arnie Duncan. Well, boy, that's how little I knew when I got into this.
Right.
but I just devoted my time to finding out more about it because I even though my daughter, who's kind of an outlier, left public school 3 weeks into the 5th grade at age 10, I was concerned about the future of the country and the 92% of the children in the country that are in public schools.
Right. And not all 92% of those kids learn the exact same way, which is why, the cookie cutter assembly line kind of grill and drill education that we're seeing propping up and being promoted, I don't think is the answer.
Absolutely not. And I learned that my limited teaching experience was 25 years ago when I taught remedial math at a private college in Florida. And so I saw in there these were wealthy children who had young people who did not understand length times width, much less length times width times depth. And I'm thinking, didn't they get tutors? Are their minds different? What's going on? But I knew I had a different kind of mind, and I knew other people I knew had a different kind of mind. And so when I started drawing things in 3-dimension on the board and using manipulatives and talking about, counting with your Lego and skip counting and base 10 and those things where you could actually touch something or visualize a thing, not 8 times 7, not something that's more abstract, then I started seeing the light bulbs going off. And It was so fulfilling because, teachers talk about those light bulb moments and the kids were going, why didn't nobody ever tell us this? We never learned it this way.
And that's the importance of a teacher. And this is why I'm a big fan of teachers, because I've had some really just amazing teachers that touched me, that grabbed my attention, that helped me think in a different way. I never really had a bad teacher. I had teachers who presented the things and I wasn't as inspired, but I had friends who were. I think it's all individual, and I think it's all in your own perspective, which is why I don't buy into the frame that there are bad teachers out there. I think there are some that are more inspiring to some of us and some less.
Well, we've had people in our group tell us quite a few times that their first child loved Mrs. Jones. And Mrs. Jones hung the moon. She was the greatest teacher in that school, probably in America. Their second child had Mrs. Jones, and they clashed. And Mrs. Jones was suddenly the worst teacher in the country, the worst teacher in the school, of course, because she wasn't meeting the needs. Somehow, the second child said, this is a horrible teacher. She was a horrible teacher for that child personally.
Yeah.
So anybody that says, oh, they're bad teachers, talk to somebody who loves that teacher.
Yeah, no, I had a bunch of them, and I've had some that person was horrible. I hated them. I go, no, to me it was different. Talk to me on a level and help me understand on a level that was in tune with me. And that's why I think it's important that we hear the stories of teachers, because all we keep hearing are from politicians and pundits about how bad things are. And it seems to me they've got the agenda that they want to privatize, profitize, and control everything our kids get. And that's why I'm glad to see your group that you've co-founded with some 55,000 members across the country are standing up, speaking out, and saying, we're not taking this lying down.
Well, we welcome parents, too. We welcome parents since day one because I'm a parent and not a K through 12 teacher. So anybody that shares our mission, we want to see them in our group. We want them to read our fan page. We have an open fan page. We have the group that you join. We have state BATS groups for every state plus DC. We have several international groups. I started Canada Badass Teachers, Canada BATS, when I found that Teach for America was headed into Canada.
And it's interesting you bring up Teach for America, because most of my friends say, oh, the Republicans are destroying education. I go, yeah, they are, but the Democrats are helping them.
Yes, it
seems to be bipartisan.
It's bipartisan. We have a little meme that we put up showing a donkey and an elephant under a sheet, and you can see their shape, and it says, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, I'm a bat, because we're fighting. What we're fighting is the 1%.
Right.
So you can blame different parties. You can blame one party for this. We can blame another party for that. The 1% is what's behind it.
Yeah, it's all about the control and the money. I mean, because education, there's a lot of money involved in this, and if they can skim off a large portion of it for themselves, so better for them.
Well, charter schools, hedge fund managers love charter schools. You can get a return for your investors of, 67% after 7 years. So that's why you would see Andre Agassi Charter School. You see all these wealthy sports figures that love children, and they start a charter school because their accountant says, hey, wow, you love kids, here's a great tax write-off, and you're helping children.
Yeah, so your philanthropy is more of a tax dodge than it is about actually doing something.
Yes, and it makes you look like, your fans appreciate it. Oh, look, they're helping children.
Oh, how sweet.
But we rail against most charters because they can pick and choose their facts and
their students.
So if you have someone who has an IEP, that charter, unless you have a charter, I mean, there are probably some charters out there that specialize in this, I don't know, but charters don't want you if you have an IEP. They don't want you if you have a behavioral issue, and they don't want you if you don't test well on standardized tests. And how many of us know kids that are brilliant, but they freeze on a test?
That was me. I never did well on the standardized tests. What's an IAP for folks, or an IEP for folks who don't know?
Individualized education profile. These are our children with some learning difficulties of various kinds that need either longer, maybe they're sight impaired, hearing impaired. They need accommodations because they don't learn at the same rate in the same way that other children do. But none of our children are average. Actually, did you realize that 50% of our children are below average?
I didn't know that. I'm sure the testing.
Think about it.
I'm sure the testing's telling us that.
Think about what that means. 50% of our children are below average. What's the definition of average?
Yeah,
our politicians say this, and people go, "Oh my gosh, we've got to get 50%. 50% of them aren't doing as well as the other 50%." Well, when everybody starts making 100 on a test, and you still want to say somebody's below average? Oh, the games they play with the numbers are pretty hysterical, except we're just crying about the numbers. The games they play.
I've heard people say that, and I had never dawned on me how dumb that statement actually is until this very moment.
Well, and actually things like, what's the third grade reading level? It's an average.
Right.
So if you say half of our third graders are not reading at grade level, yeah, right, you're right.
Wow.
And then you have the other difficulty with the standardized tests. There are always questions, there are field test questions, so our kids are a guinea pig because they throw in some fifth grade questions to see if the third graders can answer them. Then they manipulate the cut score because they want 70% on average to fail. So in your schools that were starving of resources, you could have 95% of the kids fail. In the schools in the wealthy zip codes, then you're probably going to have only 35-40% of them fail. But on average, if they can make the test so tricky, the questions so convoluted and ridiculous, and then throw in questions that are 2 years ahead of what the kids have even learned, then you can say, 70% failed, so it's the teacher's fault.
Yeah, and then we can take money away from the schools and charterize them and privatize them and all of that. It's amazing what we've allowed to have happen, Priscilla. And that's why I'm thrilled to see the Bats are out there and active. And that's why I'm glad that we've partnered with the Bats to every week to do a segment and to talk about education issues. And I hope that we'll get to talk to you again real soon, Priscilla. And thank you for your time, and thanks for co-founding this group.
Sure. Thank you so much for recognizing Bats.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much. Priscilla Stanstead, co-founder of the Badass Teachers Association, badassteacher.org, the website. We've got a link at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
I want to take a moment to thank you for your support. If you're helping to raise children as a parent, teacher, family member, etc., I acknowledge the sacrifices that you make, and I thank you. Now, in terms of this music, I hope it comes across very clearly how much I love teaching and how much I believe we must do better for our children. As a veteran teacher, I've seen the damage caused by ill-conceived reforms and the era of teacher bashing, labeling students, and labeling schools. We need as much support as possible to fight this machine that's not making decisions with the best interest of children in mind. Please, stand with us.
We're yelling, stop this madness from the front lines, bringing you a breath of fresh air. Check the sunrise, how people grind, and you know that we don't stop. Highly effective, ever rising right to the top.
History, as the old adage goes, is written by the winners, even though many winners are losers as human beings. For a clear example of this irony, check out the new national monument to corporate greed created by our Park Service in Chicago. It's on the site of what had been Pullman, a company town created by the feudalistic 19th century profiteer George Pullman. He amassed a fortune as a railcar manufacturer, infamously suppressing the wages of his 5,000 factory workers. Yet, he considered himself a beneficent employer, having built a 600-acre town for the workforce and vaingloriously naming the new home place for himself. It included houses he rented to them, churches, schools, a bank, library, and parks, all owned by his company. Indeed, when officials announced this year that Pullmanstown was becoming an honored part of America's park system, officials attested to his generosity by hailing it as a place he created, quote, to provide his employees a good life. Pullmantown's workers, however, were less charmed, for he ruled the burg as autocratically as he did his factories. No saloons or agitators allowed, nor did he allow any public speeches, town meetings, independent newspapers, or even open discussions. Resentful residents created a little ditty that summed up the surreal feel of the place. We are born in a Pullman house, fed from the Pullman shops, taught in the Pullman schools, catechized in the Pullman church, and when we die, we shall go to Pullman hell. In 1894, the workers got Pullman's hell on earth when he drastically cut their wages but refused to lower their rent. He had guaranteed a 6% return to the wealthy investors who financed the town, he explained, and their needs came first. This is Jim Hightower saying, now 100